Abuna Anthony Mourad, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Andrew, for having me.
How's your Lent going?
So far, so good, although it feels like the spiritual warfare of Lent kicked in a little bit early this year. But overall,
You
Lent
broke
is
your
always a
fast already,
blessing.
Abuna?
Oh, no, not that kind of warfare. I wish that was my issue, but no.
Is that like, that'd be like worthy of defrocking, like an Abuna breaking their fast? Is it really unthinkable? Because like for the layman, it's like, yeah, I broke my fast, okay. But like for an Abuna, is it like, oh my goodness?
When the lay people take it so lightly and they're not as responsible, if the clergy start doing that, I'm not sure what hope we have.
Actually, I was talking to somebody who told me like her mother was in the emergency room and her grandmother was also like having issues. And I was like, what happened? She's just like, it's Lent, so the devil's testing us. Do you really believe that happens? Like once Lent kicks in,
100%.
the devil's going into overtime. Like he's putting in more hours. They're like, let's go.
100%. There was a period where I might not have believed that, but oh my goodness, it's absolutely true. It's not just like stories that we tell children so they can be extra holy during Lent. There really is something about Lent, especially that the entire body of Christ is focused on prayer and repentance and fasting and almsgiving, and like all the essentials are really put, like the focus, the spotlight is really put on those. It drives Satan and all his demonic like legions absolutely crazy. And so it's incredible, the spiritual warfare that we see. It's really interesting.
So do you think like Satan is testing and tempting and trying to make the more righteous fall, or is like everybody getting tested more during the Great Lent?
That's a good question. I think overall it's a difficult thing for anybody who chooses to take Lent seriously. But those who are more focused towards actually, using Lent as a means by which they can approach Christ even further and deepen that intimate relationship with God, they are definitely the ones who get hit the hardest. So, and this is regardless of whether or not you are clergy or, whether you're a servant at church. If you're taking Lent seriously, you got a target on your head 100%.
How do we take Lent seriously? Like, what does that mean?
So Lent is always seen as possibly like one of the most important journeys in the Orthodox Church specifically. A lot of people, unfortunately, will dumb it down only to the point of speaking of dietary restrictions. We make it only about the food. We make it only about reading ingredients on the back of the box, saying no to certain proteins and meats and dairies and whatever. And if you limit it only to that, then you're really just you're still standing in the shallow end of the pool. You haven't even begun to go underwater. You haven't gone deep at all.
Isn't that the case for most of us? Like we could be 20, 30, 40, 50 years old and
absolutely,
it's still the same thing every year.
Absolutely.
How do we break out of that
cycle? For one thing, recognize what fasting is for. We did a few videos specifically on trying to address the whole misconceptions around fasting and how it has nothing to do with dietary restrictions. And it's not like the church woke up one day and they said, you know what, like we're not receiving any donations from the people who produce meats, so we're cutting them out. Like we're going to boycott them. Like it has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the fact that the church has always taught us that the purpose behind the fasting is twofold. Number one, it's an opportunity for you to be able to teach yourself self-control, and for you to get used to the idea of saying no to yourself. Because if you can be faithful in saying no to yourself in the little things, like cheese on your sandwich, like the piece of protein that goes on top of your salad, like the cream in your coffee, if you could say no to the little things, not because those things are bad, but just because you want to practice the self-control it takes to be able to say, I won't indulge. If you can say no to the little things, then one day you'll be able to say no to the bigger things. Because when you think about it, if I can't say no to cream in my coffee, how am I ever going to be able to say no to the demon of lust, the demon of anger, the demon of judgment or unfaithfulness, or so on and so forth? How am I going to be able to battle much bigger things if I'm failing to even demonstrate any form of self-control in the little things? I think the second part of Lent that also, or that in fasting in general, that people don't take seriously, is the idea of how it is Lent is an opportunity for you to offer to God. you're actually telling the Lord, like, yes, it's true, I can enjoy this creation that you've given us. I can enjoy these foods. I could go ahead and indulge and sleep in a little bit later today. I can get away with only going to one liturgy a week. But every time you go against the desires of the body to just sit down and relax, and you do more, you fast more, you pray more, you do the extra prostrations and the matanyas, when you're doing that, you're offering something to God. You're saying, I choose you over me. So when you learn to offer and you learn to say no, then you can actually have a chance to grow spiritually.
Yeah.
When you don't take advantage of that, and you're just fasting, thinking to yourself, like, I don't know why the church like hates dairy, so I guess we'll just give up yogurt or chocolate or whatever.
Well,
it becomes superficial.
why don't we do that part like the Catholics though? Like, you're still giving something up, but you choose what it is.
Yeah,
and it's not chosen for you. Like,
it's actually funny because, obviously the Catholic Church has demonstrated a tremendous amount of economy here, meaning like they've allowed themselves to be able to meet the people where they are to an extent that, I think some people would even criticize. The Catholic Church was very, very, very devout in their fasting once upon a time. Things have maybe only recently changed in the last century or so. But prior to that, all of the apostolic churches used to fast in the same way. The Eastern Orthodox, the Catholics, the Oriental Orthodox, to which we belong. And now it's turned into, something as simple as fasting from the night before you go to liturgy. The Catholics used to fast exactly like us, which was if you're going to liturgy, you're not eating or drinking from the night before. And now it's become, ever since Vatican II, a council that they had in the last, several decades ago, it translated into, okay, as long as you're fasting that last hour before liturgy. So people from our church hear that and they think, oh, we want that too. But that's exactly the problem. What you're sitting there and saying is that I don't want to offer. I don't want to practice self-control.
Yeah.
I want you to make it easy for me. And forgive me, but if the church continues to make things easy for me, then this is exactly, the kind of generation we'll live in. The entitled, what about me, what about me, what about me kind of generation.
When did the Catholics change the actual food restrictions for fasting? Do you know?
That's a very good question. I'm not all too familiar with that. I know it had to do with the fact that ever since they started, ever since they went on the journey of missionary work, especially in a lot of the more remote areas, they adapted a lot of their teaching for those areas, and somehow it translated back into, well, if allowing it for them, then let's allow it also for the Christians in the bigger metropolises and the bigger cities. But how and when did those seeds of change begin? I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Okay, but Vatican II, the actual time required for fasting before communion was changed?
Yes, 100%.
But they do liturgies year round. They'll have liturgies at 6 p.m. So to me, that kind of makes a little bit of sense. If you're going to do it year round, in a non-Lenten period, you have a 6 p.m. liturgy, which that's unheard of in the Coptic Church, right?
No, there are some churches that will go ahead and offer liturgical prayers later in the evening. And in the process, what ends up happening is that if there are people, especially in the monastic communities, they'll still have some people who will pray, especially the hermits. They'll still pray very, very late in the day. And they're fasting in the very beginning of the day. And the other question that you have to ask yourself is, when we're seeing liturgies being prayed at 6 p.m. in the Catholic Church, is that because of something organic that happened where they were always praying at any time of the day? Or did they move it specifically because they wanted people to attend because people weren't coming on Sundays? There's a lot of questions to ask there. I don't think it's fair for us to look at what's happening in Catholic churches here in North America and to suggest that's actually what's happening in Rome, under Vatican.
Got it. Okay, so we started this conversation talking about Lent and how it's about more than food and fasting, but here we are talking a lot about food and fasting. The other component I feel like the church, for some reason, and maybe this is just my own anecdotal experience, doesn't really talk a lot about is prayer. To me, this seems like the much more important component of fasting and prayer, that we sing in the kind of the distribution of the body and blood. it seems like is it just me, or do you also feel like it just we don't talk enough about prayer and the importance of prayer in the fasting period, the Lenten period?
Yeah, so on this one, I'm going to have to disagree with you. I don't know what conversations are happening in your end of the woods, but
Yeah,
100%.
maybe I'm not listening. Maybe I'm not listening.
I gotta tell you, I mean, when you take a look even at the liturgical prayers, right? I mean, so many churches suddenly increase the amount of liturgies that we pray every single day. So if it was a
I'm not
church that
talking
was,
about more prayers being offered. I'm just talking about because my cousin encouraged me to pick up Father Matthew the Poor's The Orthodox Prayer Life. I think that's what it's
yeah,
called, Orthodox
yeah,
Way of Prayer. And this is all foreign concepts. Nobody ever I feel like ever talks about in the church,
okay,
and the importance of prayer and the relationship with God through prayer.
hmm.
Especially in the Lenten period, I hear so much about fasting, but I never heard anyone kind of delve into prayer that way.
So I think a lot of people who especially are consistent when it comes to like following up with, whether it be their spiritual guide or their father of confession, oftentimes what will happen is that you'll receive a canon of prayer specifically for Lent. And usually what will happen in Lent is that a lot of people will be asked to increase, if not even double, the amount of prayer that they do during Lent, because this is the time. This is the Olympic season every single year in the spiritual life, where you're expected to like dive in deep, go in hard, make sure like you're giving it your all. And there's a huge focus that is supposed to be put on the intimacy and the encounter with the Lord Christ, and how it is that you're supposed to come into his presence, and the importance of calling on his name, whether it be through the Jesus prayer or through, again, that intimate encounter of personal prayer with him. But 100%, the church should be very focused on this and teaching this. So,
Mm-hmm.
if somebody who, like in your situation, might not be hearing it right now, if they hear us having this conversation, I really hope they take away from our conversation, you and I, that definitely Lent is the season for us to like really, really build on that relationship. This is the moment for us to go in really deep and to try to encounter the Lord Christ through prayer.
What's a common mistake that people make during the Lent?
So we spoke briefly about putting too much emphasis on food. Um, and I think the other aspect of that I think is worth highlighting is that what ends up happening is that you put so much focus on food and you don't put enough focus on sin. The whole purpose behind the fasting is to condition the soul, to have you choose God over yourself. And so the number one thing that we often neglect to do is to also identify what are the sins that I'm going to be fasting from. St. John Chrysostom, he says something really interesting. He says, okay, so you're fasting from eating the flesh of animals, but what about your ears? Are they fasting from the gossip that you always allow yourself to listen to? What about your eyes? Are they fasting from the lustful images that you allow yourself to be able to indulge in? What about your mouth? Is it fasting from using words against your brother whom you devour simply by sitting there and gossiping about him and slandering him? He talks about the importance of, it's nice that you're fasting at the level of the food, but are you also making an effort to fast at the level of sin? Are you giving it up? Are you abstaining from sin for the sake of being able to, again, repent and grow closer in your relationship with God? So I think this is often a mistake that people make, where it becomes so focused only on the food that it doesn't become spiritual at all. It just becomes like a dietary restriction, and that's it.
Yeah. Is there a danger in kind of getting hyper spiritual during Lent? Like, I know this sounds weird, but like you go into monk mode, you're like, I'm going to pray all the time. I'm going to give up all these sins. I'm not going to talk to my friends.
Yeah.
I'm off social media, blah, blah, blah. Is there a danger in doing that? Getting like too intense, going like
I,
cold turkey with all this stuff?
I think it can be dangerous if you're doing it um, without the guidance or the wisdom of somebody who's capable of helping you think through the decisions that you're making. Remember how you were talking earlier about how, our brothers and sisters from the Catholic Church, they pick one thing and that's what they do. Let me share with you an anecdote that I think is interesting. I used to work with this person before I was a priest, really, really good guy from the Middle East. He's really a lovely guy. He was like a brother to me when we worked together. Wasn't Orthodox, but was from the Catholic Church. Really good Christian. But he wasn't used to doing Lent. And he grew up in a household where his parents always did it and his grandparents always encouraged him to go to church. And so, he knew that I was going to church and everything. He's like, "Are you doing Lent this year?" I told him, "Yeah." He goes, "I think I'm going to do it too." He goes, "What are you giving up?" And I told him, "Oh, well, we don't do the whole giving up thing. We do, all of the food. And we also try to identify some things that we want to give up that are sinful." He goes, "Okay, cool. I'm going to give up beer." so he was telling me about how it is, like it was very common for him every day when he gets home. He doesn't reach for a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. He grabs a cold beer and that's what he has, right? It's not like the guy was an alcoholic, but he really enjoyed beer. And if on the weekend he had his brothers coming over for a barbecue, he was going to have a lot of beer. And that's what he used to do on a regular basis. So he's like, "This Lent, I'm giving up beer for 40 days. And it was incredible because like week 2 into Lent, he was coming into work and this dude had the jitters because he really missed beer. He really missed beer. So it was really tough for him. But I will never forget, he came back on, I don't know how it is in the US, but like after Easter here in Canada is always Easter Monday. And so nobody comes to work on Monday. Everybody always comes in on the next Tuesday. This guy comes in on Tuesday and he's hungover. And he's hungover because he spent all of Sunday and all of Monday going through cases and cases of beers because he missed it so much. So when he came in, I'm like, "What'd you do?" He's like, me and my brothers was just like, we went nuts. Like we had a big hamburger, we had a big barbecue, and we roasted this big lamb, and like we pigged out, and we had tons of beer, and like I missed it so much. I'm like, "So what was the point?" I told him, what was the point? Like,
you literally say that to him?
Yeah. Well, we were very close. We were literally like brothers. I'm like, "So what's the point? You gave it up for 40 days and then you just go back to indulge." And he goes, "Well, that's 40 days where I didn't have beer, so it's gonna have to be good enough, right?" And I think this is the concern. If a person goes into Lent with the intention of exactly like you said, "I'm going to go into monk mode. I'm going to start sleeping on the floor. I'm going to start like only eating dirt." And not eating anything else. I'm gonna not sit down and only stand up. Like whatever misconceptions we have about what it means to be spiritual. And then after the 40 days, like, "Oh, I can't wait to just go back and indulge in Netflix and social media, and I'm gonna go back to my sins, and I'm gonna eat whenever I want, and gluttony and lust and all that." What's the point? Like, so you could say that for 55 days you acted like a saint, and then afterwards, what? You went back to being you. You never intended on actually changing. So if you don't have a spiritual guide walking with you, guiding you, telling you where the right balance is, then yes, absolutely, it can very well be something that is detrimental.
Right. So you recommend probably in the beginning of Lent consulting with your spiritual guide, talking to them, creating a plan, kind of what am I going to do, and how am I going to progress during this season?
100%. 100%. We should all be getting a spiritual canon from our Father of Confession. And if we don't have a spiritual guide or a Father of Confession, then everyone should make it a point to make sure that they have one before the end of Lent, because in Orthodoxy, it's really clear. No one goes to heaven alone. You cannot be your own guide. This is why the Lord established discipleship. Everybody in the church, from the youngest of children all the way to, His Holiness the Patriarch of Alexandria, all of us have an Abba. All of us have someone that we are accountable to. If we don't have that, then you're really only just coaching yourself, and that's silly, because you're always going to let yourself off the hook. You're never going to hold yourself accountable, and you're always going to give yourself what you want. So don't be your own self-coach. Have someone who you love and who knows loves you, who can hold you accountable.
I feel like for the most part, people think that has to be a priest. What do you think on that?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. I know for a lot of people, there's a difference between your spiritual guide and your Father of Confession. Obviously, your Father of Confession has to be a priest because, they participate in the sacrament and they give you the grace of the absolution through the reading of the words of the mystery. And that requires the priesthood. But your spiritual guide doesn't necessarily have to be a priest. It doesn't have to be your Father of Confession. I have to admit, it's always convenient when it is. But I personally have my Father of Confession who also guides me spiritually. And he's also very aware of the fact that there's also 2 other people that I might go to for spiritual advice. And it works out perfectly because there are such things as spiritual talents that are given to different people. And so it's perfectly fine for our young women to have spiritual guides who are dedicated female servants in the church. And I think that's wonderful and absolutely essential. I also think it's perfectly fine for you to choose to say, you know, well, my father confession is also my spiritual guide. But no, it doesn't have to be a priest.
Do you find that, I find that that's a big struggle of mine, and I think many of my peers, is finding that right partnership, that right coach, if I can use that word. How often do you think, when you're not progressing in the spiritual life and you're working with a spiritual guide, that it's that it's really just your fault? But people hop around, right? They hop around a lot, like, oh, this is my spiritual guide. Oh no, you know what? That wasn't that great. Let me go to the spiritual guide. And then, oh, I met Abuna Anthony at a retreat. Oh, I'd love for you to be my spiritual guide. How do we balance that? Because you need a relationship. You need it to kind of be a working one that's beneficial to both of you in a way. But when it's not working, like, how do we reassess?
So I think we just have to make a distinction again between your father of confession and your spiritual guide.
Mm-hmm.
If you are not connecting with your father of confession, do not let that deprive you from receiving the grace of, the mystery of confession and repentance and receiving the absolution. You should still be confessing, even though you are not necessarily connecting. And the reason I say that is because nobody in their right mind would suggest and say, well, because I don't have a connection with my priest at church, I'm not going to be attending liturgy and taking the Eucharist from his hands. Mm-hmm. The mysteries are different. The mysteries are for our salvation.
Yeah.
So I understand that you might not want that priest to be your spiritual guide, but don't forbid yourself from participating in the mystery. You need that grace for your own repentance and for your own spiritual success. But as far as a spiritual guide goes, I always worry because our generation today, exactly like you said, we like to priest hop. Like, we treat priests the same way that we treat, like people who go to ice cream shops and like, oh, can I just taste this one right before, like,
that's me. Right? That's me, Abuna. I'll sample like 6 of them.
I've got no problem with it. If it's ice cream, no problem. But when you start doing this with whether it be servants or priests or monks or whatever it may be, it becomes really like you just gave a great example. Abuna so and so just gave a great talk at this conference or this retreat. Let me see if he wants to be my spiritual guide. Well, forgive me, that says something about the level of maturity at which you're making this decision. So you saw this priest, he said something, you think he's funny, you think he's charismatic, he's got a talent in speaking, and now you're suddenly deciding, I'm going to commit my spiritual life in his hands. Like, so you're saying it's about relationship, but without even having relationship with this priest, you're saying, oh, it would be cool if I was connected with you.
Great point.
So I think it's very concerning when this is the way we think. I would almost rather pick a priest where, sure, me and him otherwise would never be buddies, but at the same time, I believe he's a spiritual giant. I believe this person has experience in warfare. I believe this person, his prayers are acceptable before God, and I want to be discipled by him. I think I would rather that be the criteria versus simply, he made me laugh. I can imagine myself going and having coffee with him. It's got to be more than that.
Do you have to deal with rejecting people who want to be like your spiritual children? I know that sounds, you might not want to answer that, but like, do you ever just feel like, guy, like, listen, we just met? Like,
no, of course.
Because it's a commitment, right? On your part, right? You're now responsible for this person.
It is. And I'm so happy you said that, because I don't think people understand that. It's, this becomes relationship. And exactly like you said, it requires commitment on both ends, which means that if you just confess to me at a random retreat where you saw me, I have a responsibility before God to ask about you after, because if you just dumped your life confession on me, right, and here I am encouraging you to repent and to walk the way that will lead you to the kingdom, and you stop reaching out, well, I just committed to something here, right? So there's some people who I'm like, I'll take your confession, I'll give you the absolution, but you need to find a spiritual guide. And they're like, oh, Abuna, well, can it be you? No. And the reason I say that is not because I don't have time for you. It really is because you need to be committed to whoever it is that you're going to be sitting with. And to be honest, telephone confessions aren't the best. Telephone confessions and spiritual guidance is not the greatest solution. You need to have someone who's accessible to you, even if it's not a person, like I said, who you would naturally see yourself saying, you know, oh, if this was a different life, we'd be buddies. Like, you don't have to be the priest's buddy.
Right,
You just
right.
have to see Christ in him.
Yeah. Okay, so take me back to Anthony Mourad, 12 years old. Where'd you grow up? Kind of what was your like your childhood like? Where'd you grow up, and
Yeah.
who were your spiritual mentors, growing up?
So I grew up in Montreal, Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I actually came to Montreal, or we came to Canada when I was a little bit older than 5 years old. I was born in Cairo in Egypt. Um, and we ended up like spending the vast majority of our life in Montreal. Um, Always attended Virgin Mary's Church in Montreal, Canada. We had a wonderful priest there by the name of Abuna Seraphim. Abuna Seraphim is definitely the first person I ever saw the icon of Christ in. Like Abuna Seraphim was like, he's the embodiment of like a walking heart. Like no matter what you do to this man, no matter what you do to him, he was just so loving, so compassionate, always so happy to see you, regardless of what happened. He's such a beautiful icon of the love of God. And it was incredible because like there was a huge communication barrier there. The man struggled when it came to like tying down the English, but he spoke the language of love so beautifully that we just loved him in return. And he's really what attracted me to the church.
How old were you then,
Oh my goodness.
when you kind of recognized his spirituality and were attracted to it?
Yeah, probably towards high school, like anywhere from like between the ages of like 15 and 18. Like that's probably when I started seeing it for real. I always loved like I always loved him in the sense where I always saw him as very kind and loving and gentle. But when I started getting serious about my confessions, and he wanted me to serve Sunday school and this and that, that's when I got to see him in a very, very different light. And I think Abuna Seraphim was probably the first person to have that kind of really powerful impact on me, in saying like I wanted people to feel as happy in seeing me as when I felt happy in seeing him.
This was in high school. You wanted to be like that?
I wanted to learn from him that aspect, 100%. As far as the priesthood goes, man, that never ever crossed my mind, because we would also look at Abuna Seraphim and say, yeah, this man is at a whole other level. Like he's never resting, never sleeping, constantly going. It's one thing after the other. And like we grew up with his kids, right? Like Abuna, so like his kids were our friends. So like you look at Abuna and you're like, man, this takes a whole other breed of a human being to be able to do this. And like, so to us, we want to become a priest, like as deacons, don't get me wrong, as deacons, most of us do this. We're like, oh, it would be cool to say this part, right? Of the liturgy. But it's never more than that. Nobody stays up at night and says, oh, I would love to get phone calls at 2 a.m. Nobody says that, right? So the priesthood came out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting it. And
what were you doing at the time? Were you were working? You were a professional?
Yeah, I had graduated from the John Molson School of Business, and I had like a bachelor's degree in commerce, a specialty in marketing, and I was working at the head office of some bank in Montreal, and the church in Ottawa came and approached. And Ottawa is about 2 hours away from Montreal, so even though we're like in the same geographically, we're not too far away from each other. But I had no connection to Ottawa whatsoever. Like I had one family member who lived in the area, but other than that, I didn't know anybody from Ottawa, and there was no reason for anyone from Ottawa to know about me. And it just so happened that they came knocking, and my immediate reaction was like, "You've got the wrong guy."
Yeah. Well, like, can you share more specifically what happened? Like how did it come about?
Funny enough, I was actually visiting that church because my cousin's daughter was getting married. I was getting engaged, and I was just going to take pictures for them. And so I show up to the engagement, and I'm dressed as a deacon because I need to be up and close to take pictures. And I'm taking pictures of the engagement. And after the engagement, the priest calls me into his office, and he's like, "Yeah, like listen." My older brother at that time was a priest. He's a priest in Montreal at the church where we grew up. His name is Abuna Krollos.
Oh, your brother.
Yeah.
Oh,
My
sorry, I didn't know that.
yeah,
Okay, so
my
it's not like
biological brother.
completely out of nowhere.
Well, it's
I'm
in the
sure
sense.
Abuna knew that your brother is a priest, obviously.
Yes, he did, and that's actually that. I think that got under my skin. Where it's like you don't know me, you know nothing about me, but you know my brother's a priest, and you're hoping it runs in the DNA.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, he took me to the side and he's like, you know, we want you to pray about this with us because we
Mhm,
think you could be the next priest here at this church. There was already two priests there, and he needed a third.
mhm.
And my reaction was basically to say like you've got the wrong guy. Like my public
Yeah, yeah,
confession is never going to agree. My wife is never going to agree, and I don't want it. So like we're good. Like go
yeah,
try somewhere else, right?
right.
And then I don't know how it happened. 7 weeks later, I became a priest. Like
Wow,
it
wow.
was.
Did your brother, Abuna Carlos, play a role in that?
Yeah, he sent me up.
Changing the he's what's that?
He set me up.
He's
He totally set me up. He threw up the lob and somebody else alley ooped it, and that was the end of it. And ever since that was the beginning of the end of
yeah.
my life.
How long had your brother been a priest before you were ordained?
Like, he was ordained June of 2013. I
Hmm.
was September 2014, so a little bit over a year.
Oh wow, wow.
Yeah.
But you had no expectation that your number was going to be called to get in the game.
No. And me and my wife had already agreed that this was
Yeah,
not going to happen. And
yeah,
I get God has his way of.
yeah.
I think God saw me and he said, you know, there's no other way this guy's going to heaven, so we got to put him. We got to put a black robe on him. So thank God.
I thought that. Besides your brother, are there other clergy in your family?
We have an uncle who was a full deacon, so he's considered clergy. But other than that, no, not really.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's kind of in your DNA now.
You say so.
Yeah. What's you take a lot of confessions, Abuna. What's a harmless confession that you can share?
Harmless?
Yeah.
What do you mean? What is that kind of question? What do you mean?
No, what's a harmless confession that you could share about yourself?
Oh, harmless confession about me. Well, the easiest one is like I struggle with the demon of gluttony. As you can see, I'm the fittest human being on the planet, right? But no,
I'm the same way, but don't worry.
it's very unfortunate, but many of us don't take that one seriously,
Yeah.
especially now in the age where it's so easy to indulge. Like
Mhm.
you ask any good Coptic Christian, what are you doing the night before Lent? And they're basically telling you we're stuffing our faces,
Yeah.
right? And like we don't even think of that as gluttony. And
Um,
then you tell them, okay, what are you doing the night of the feast? You just spent 55 days saying no to yourself. What are you going to do the night of the feast of the resurrection? Well, my mother's going to cook up a storm enough to be able to feed a full football team, and we're going to eat it, just the four of us.
yeah.
Like it's unbelievable how we just
Yeah.
neglect to realize that there's a difference between being hospitable and loving
Mhm.
and using food as a means to communicate love, and another
Mhm.
thing for us to completely indulge and like
Yeah.
be gluttonous. But
What's
yeah,
your guilty pleasure?
man, I think
What?
after Lent,
Uh,
my like the things I look forward to the most is probably ورق عنب.
oh
Mahshi is up there.
yeah. Or Anab? Oh yeah. I'm
It's
not a
up
fan
there.
of mahshi crumb though. Like the
Oh,
you love
that's
it?
not even in the same category.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Those,
yeah. It's not. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, that's why I don't even like that. It has the same name. Um, but yeah, it's gross compared to what I know. Okay, I want to talk about Coptic Orthodox Answers. I think that's like such a great ministry. Of so many people have told me, and I've heard so many people say, like, "Wow, this is like such a great thing that the Coptic Church is doing." What's the origin story behind that? The motivation?
yeah.
How did that come about?
So the first couple of years into my priesthood, I started diving deeper into the faith. Like I wish I would be able to tell everyone that I was already like fully like involved in the theology of the church and I loved the faith and I knew the history before I became a priest. But the honest to God truth is that the priesthood is what propelled me into wanting to learn more. And
Mm,
I thank God for it because if it wasn't for the priesthood, I probably would have never discovered just how beautiful and how wealthy our church is. But in those first couple of years, I started digging up so much beautiful content about the teaching of the church that I fell in love. I was completely enamored with
Mhm.
the teachings of the church. I discovered the patristic fathers, the tradition of orthodoxy. Like there was so much I ended up like uncovering that I was basically walking around telling people like, "Did you know this?" And some people, like my older brother, were like, "Yeah." And there was other people who were like, "No, we had no idea." So when I realized that there are people who were as ignorant as me, I started thinking to myself, "No, people are not going to sit down and read, like a 300 or 400 page book, because people don't read anymore. We're so desensitized to like we can barely read tweets without giving up halfway. Like, how are we going to sit down and actually read like a theological treatise?" So
Yeah.
I knew that being a person who was very stimulated visually through video content, um, I thought to myself it would be really good to be able to create content online in under 10 minutes to be able to give, quick and short and powerful doses of teaching, at the
Mhm.
very least to put people on track so that they can go learn more further on. And then I spoke to a spiritual guide of mine and I told him, "What do you think of this idea?" And he looked at me and he was like, "Did you speak to Abuna Gabriel from Montreal?" I'm like, "No, why?" He goes, "Because he just talked to me about this just a few days ago. He
Mm.
wants to do the same thing as you." I'm like, "Really?" And Abuna Gabriel and I know each other from a very long time ago, as growing up in the church as youth. We used to compete against each other in basketball, soccer, volleyball. Like we used to do all the tournaments against each other in churches, and like so we're very, very good friends.
Mhm.
Um, so he's like, the both of you guys should connect and like put a plan together and like share it with me." And little did I know, Abuna Gabriel was speaking to the same spiritual guide as me, and like we connected. And a little bit after that, in late 2015, Coptic Orthodox Answers was born.
That's great. And
Yeah.
initially, did it start off as a partnership with CYC? I noticed that branding was on some videos and then it's not on
Yeah.
other videos.
When CYC started seeing what we were doing, they were very encouraged and they were looking for good content. And so
Mhm.
they basically told us, "Hey, like, do you mind if we take your content and put it out there? It'll be
Mhm.
promoting your channel, and at the same time, it'll give us content." And we're like, "Yeah, I mean, the content is for whoever can benefit from it." So,
Got it.
like, we had no issues with anybody and everybody. You know what's interesting is that we were so shocked as to some of the things that God did with us. We had churches in Germany reach out to us and say, "Can we take your videos and put like subtitles on them and like
Mhm.
put them out in German?" And we're like, "Yeah." The
Wow.
Ethiopian church, a church in Europe, the Eritrean churches, the Syriac churches in India. It was incredible how like it really kicked off. And we were just hoping to inspire maybe just one or two people to see the beauty of their faith and like the depth and the wealth of the Orthodox Church. And God has used it in really beautiful ways. Like we don't deserve any
Mhm.
of the applause on this one, because it really is God who works through all of it.
Yeah. Where do the questions come from? How do you come up with the questions and the content itself?
So the website itself, Coptic Orthodox Answers.org, a lot of people go in there and type their questions to
Mm.
search for different videos, and we get whatever they type sent
Mm.
to us, and then we see all of the questions. And then you also have like the comments of the actual videos on YouTube. If you go check out the YouTube channel, a lot of the videos have comments where people are asking a variety of different questions. And then because we also are priests who actually have a pastoral ministry in our local churches, our own youth, our servants, like the people that we deal with. And then there was an initial like 100 questions that Abuna Gabriel and I had just sat down and like, "What questions were you asking yourself when you
Mm.
were between the ages of like, 18 and 25?" And we just blasted out a whole bunch of the questions, and it was incredible. One thing bled into another, and then we slowly started realizing like, okay, well, to answer this question, you have to understand this. Okay, so let's answer that question first
Mm.
before we move on to this. And it kicked off that way, and now I think we have over 200 videos or something on the channel, not to mention like all the short words of wisdom ones where we share content from other beautiful speakers across the church, whether it be
Mhm.
bishops or priests or um, so yeah, there's a lot of content out there now, thank God.
One thing that would scare me about being a priest is getting stumped by like some youth asking me a question that should be
Yeah.
basic or I should know the answer to. Um, has that ever happened to you? How do you deal with that? Or
Yeah.
like because when you're preparing a video, that's different, right? You have time to research and
Yeah.
prepare the script, but uh,
So true story. um, this happened to me in my first year of the priesthood. Remember, Ottawa is not my city, and the Church of St. George and St. Anthony is not where I grew up, right? So
Uh-huh.
I show up to this church. People don't know me very well. They just like, again, they didn't even have a chance to get to know me in any which way. The priest just really felt this would be a good fit, and like they took a gamble on me. So I show up and I'm giving a youth talk to a whole bunch of like youth and young professionals. And here I am talking about something specifically related to salvation. And then one of the servants who's sitting there is looking at me, and he's giving me this look where he's trying to be respectful, but his eyes are telling me like, you're an idiot. And so he raises his hand and he goes, like, Abuna, just for the sake of like conversation, like, are you suggesting ABC? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, Saint Athanasius disagrees with you.
Ouch.
And I promise you, and it's funny because I have the book right here, but he basically says, you know, on the incarnation, and then he references it, right? And I'm not used to this. Like I used to just give like talks on like on prayer and almsgiving and generosity and obedience and honoring your parents, and okay, let's talk about some social stuff. But this is the first time I'm entering into the realm of theology. Getting stumped that one time and recognizing like, you know, maybe I don't know everything I thought I knew. That actually pushed me to go deeper and to say, I don't want that to happen again. And that really lit the fire in me to want to learn. That conversation with that young man. And I thank God for him humiliating me, at least bruising my ego just enough for me to say, I want to know more for the sake of being, you know, a proper reference for these young people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a big responsibility. And I've been in those talks where I see questions getting asked, answers given that are kind of, you know, iffy, but I feel like anyone who's giving a talk feels like they have to give an answer. You know, sometimes they don't know or they're not sure, but they won't say that sometimes. But is there any, so you've answered like now thousands of questions in your life as a priest now, not only as you're giving talks through the ministry, Coptic Orthodox Answers. Is there an answer that you've given that, you know, you wish you could take back, or something you've posted where you're like, I want to modify that, I want to amend it? Or
so I don't think I necessarily have anything that I would take back as far as an answer, but I will tell you this because I also recognize that I have my own flaws at the level of the way that I speak, in the sense where sometimes I'll use humor and sarcasm to be able to emphasize certain things. And sometimes that can be interpreted as mockery. And, you know, when I want to poke fun at some of our cultural traits, sometimes I'll poke fun at the fact that, like, we don't know the difference between being Egyptian and being Christian. We think they're synonymous, but they're not, right? You go to heaven because you're Christian. You don't go to heaven because you're Egyptian. But again, not everyone understands that concept. And so sometimes I'll poke fun at stuff. And my answer is not as gentle and as generous as I would have liked it to be. And some people, the purpose is not to offend. I can still use humor. But no, there are some answers that I gave that I just wish I was a little bit wiser in the way I answered it, and I didn't have to emphasize certain things in the same way. But I will say this, because you hinted at this before. I really think that there is such a beautiful strength that is seen in a speaker who is capable of saying, that is a good question and I don't know the answer to it. Let me look it up and get back to you. I would much rather a person tell me, I don't know, I haven't studied this, than for a person to sit there and fabricate some sort of like answer that makes no sense. Because that's definitely something that like would get under my skin when I was looking for answers. I don't want someone to give me their personal opinion, and I don't want somebody to say, well, I don't know, but, and then to fabricate something on the spot. And you're like, well, do you not know? Or is that the answer? Like, where are we? I would honestly respect the speaker much more if they said, I don't know, but let's look it up and find out.
Okay. A little later, I'm going to go through some rapid questions that people gave me. So we'll see, you know, if you have an answer for all of them, we'll put you on the spot. But I perused through TikTok looking for Coptic Orthodox Answers videos, and I found the most popular one, over 1 million views, was is having a tattoo basically wrong for an Orthodox Christian. What is it about that video that went viral, you think, as opposed to others which still get a lot of views, tens of thousands, 50,000, but why did that one like really like strike a chord with people, you think?
I have no idea, Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
And we like, and believe me when I tell you, like the person, God bless him, who actually started posting our content on TikTok, did it initially without our consent. And he was very honest in saying, this isn't Abuna Anthony's official channel. I just want to share his content. And he would take these short, like 2 or 3 minute clips from our live Q&As, and he would just share them with his friends. And he created a channel that was once called Ask a Copt. And that was the name of the channel. And then randomly, I was told by some of the high school kids at my church, like you're on TikTok and you're going viral. And I'm like, that's impossible. I don't even have a TikTok account. And they're like, no, you're on TikTok. And at the time, I think the video had like 500,000 views, and they were super excited because like their local Ottawa priest was and now, like you said, it got like over 1 million views and like something ridiculous, like 50,000 comments. And I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of likes. And I was shocked because like, I guess people just kept sharing it. They kept coming up on people's feed, but I don't know what it is about people's interest in tattoos that made them. You know what I think it was? I think a whole bunch of people sent it to their parents and said, "You see, look, he's saying I'm not going to go to hell if I get a tattoo."
I did see that in the comments, like the most liked comments were those, but and then it looked like somebody also wanted a follow-up video on piercings. I didn't see the follow-up video, so maybe you could give it to them right now. Like what? So tattoos and piercings, they go hand in hand. You address tattoos and people can look up the TikTok video, but what about piercings? Like I want a little nose ring, maybe a little earring. Like
so I think we just need to make a distinction between we like to speak of everything at the level of is it right or is it wrong? And if we say something is wrong, we immediately translate that into, okay, so you're going to hell. Like, no, hold on a second. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's wrong that might not lead you to hell, right? On the spectrum of things, it's not just good or bad. There's good, better, and best. And so if you get a nose piercing and you have a ring on in your nostril, or if one of our young ladies gets an additional 2 piercings on the side of her ear, like that's not a pagan symbol of like slavery to a god. Once upon a time, piercings were used to be able to attribute yourself to a specific tribe. That's not why people are doing it anymore. If a guy gets a piercing at the level of his eyebrow, that doesn't suddenly make him into like some sort of slave trader. So like I think we just have to move away from that conversation and ask more sincere questions to our young people, which is, why are you doing this?
Right.
If you're doing it to be able to attract attention to yourself, well, do you know that there is such a sin as vainglory? And is that something that you struggle with? But I don't see any parents sitting their daughters down and talking to them about, why do you put on so much makeup? Are you trying to attract attention to yourself? Do you know the sin of vainglory? And again, I'm not intentionally trying to compare like overdoing makeup to additional piercings or tattoos. I am talking about the sin of vainglory. If somebody is struggling with vainglory and they tell me I want to get additional piercings, as a priest, I would tell them, don't do it. Don't do it, because you're feeding that fire that you're supposed to be putting out. But if a person comes to me and tells me, Abuna, I want to get a Coptic cross on my wrist, and it's a huge symbol of my heritage and my tradition, and I love it, and I also want it to have a deep spiritual meaning for me, I don't see a problem with that.
Right.
Person tells me I want to put a poem at the back of my back because I read it once during a dark day and now I want to I'll be like, no, like, what do you forgive me, like anyways.
Right. Especially when I know what you mean. Intent really matters in these kind of things.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So I watched a bunch of your Q&A videos on YouTube and I loved all of them. But the one I loved the most, Abuna, which might surprise you, is you had one group years back. It was like 4th through 6th graders ask questions. It was in the church setting. It was during COVID. You guys were all wearing masks. But it was like an open Q&A session. And I compared it in my mind to all the Q&A sessions you were doing with adults.
Yeah.
And the kids' questions were so great to me because it was like, on the one hand, they would have these like really funny, silly questions like, why are dinosaurs allowed to eat meat, or something like that, and then they would have like deep, like meta questions, profound questions. I don't even think they knew were profound. Like one of them was, if Jesus is talking to God, does that mean they're two persons because he's talking to someone else, or is he talking to himself? And so like they were very interesting. Whereas with the adult questions, it's like, I want a boyfriend, how do I get a girlfriend? It's like
Yeah.
all relationship stuff, right? For the most part, or, what do I do about my career, yada, yada.
Yeah.
What is it about kids that you've noticed is like different about them and the questions they ask? And how does that change as we grow up?
I think for children, because of their innocence and their purity, they don't take things for granted, in the sense where if you make a statement that to you might be obvious because you've been conditioned to just believe that this is what it is, a child who's innocent and pure will stop and say, okay, but why? And they ask that question much more than you and me. And you and I might be perfectly fine with, well, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
To a child, that's not satisfying, right? And so you told me that Jesus is God, and now Jesus is praying, but prayer is always supposed to be to God. So who is Jesus praying to? Because if he's speaking to himself, isn't that slightly crazy? Like for kids,
Right.
for kids, they're doing the math and they're like, it doesn't add up. And I think it's absolutely beautiful to see them do that, because we really should have that kind of simplicity where we are not in any way apprehensive to be able to ask questions that might seem obvious to others. You and me, if we're sitting in a big crowd of a couple of hundred people and the priest says something that went right over your head, we might look around real quick to see, like, how are people going to react if I raise my hand and say, I didn't get that. What did you mean?
Yeah.
But with children, they're like, they don't care, right?
There's
So
no
they're like,
shame. Yeah.
exactly. To them, it's like, I didn't get it, right? So I think that is something we could learn from children.
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem like they're genuinely just seeking the truth and they just want
Yeah.
answers,
Yeah.
And a lot of their questions are not focused on themselves and their own life. It's very like outward, I noticed just from that one video I watched, like
Right.
they want to know about the world, about Christ, about our relationship with him and his creation and things like that. They're just curious,
Yeah.
as opposed to, I feel like as we grow and become adults, it's more, tattoo questions or whatever. It's like, it's all just kind of about us a little bit, but
Yeah.
I don't think that's a little generalization, but that's kind of just maybe one difference. All right, so now let's get to some adult questions. I fielded questions from people. I was like, hey, I'm going to be talking to Abuna Anthony Mourad. If you guys have any questions, shoot them my way, and I got some. So maybe we could do a quick, like, rapid fire session. I'll just read them out, and you can,
Sure.
God willing, give them a response. So one gentleman was wondering if it's incorrect for Copts to consider themselves as Arabs.
I guess it really does depend on what you mean by Arabs, right? For a lot of people here in the West, an Arab is simply a person who speaks a specific type of language. And obviously, we can't deny that most of us speak Arabic, right? You can sit there and talk to me about how it is. No, I speak Egyptian. No, you're actually wrong. You speak Arabic, right? I mean, when you go into Google Translate and you want to know what a word is, you're going to pick Arabic. There's no Egyptian in there. So
Yeah.
if what you mean by Arabic is simply the language, then there's no harm in saying that. But oftentimes to us who are raised in the Middle East, especially because of the conflict of the Arab reality of Islam and the Coptic reality, where we find our ancestry and our heritage among the indigenous people of Egypt, who are really the early Christians of Egypt, long before the Arabs invaded Egypt. Then yes, some people might sit there and insist and say, no, I'm not an Arab, I'm an Egyptian. And what they're hinting at is not language. What they're hinting at there is heritage. Especially the Christian heritage that was, mostly erased, because, when you went into Egypt, and especially the 3rd or 4th century, the vast majority of Egypt was Christian. That's no longer the case today. So if you're speaking from a perspective of heritage, I understand your perspective. And yes, you would be right to say I'm Egyptian, I'm not Arab. But that also doesn't mean that if a person says I'm an Arab and they're only speaking at the level of language there, when they use that word, then like, no, we can't treat that person as an outcast or an apostate because they sold out, our ancestors who suffered. So
well, what if they mean it more than just language? Like they want to identify culturally as Arab, like,
No problem. And that's a person who identifies and says, I love Egypt, the motherland. I love the music that comes out of there. I love the culture that's there. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And you can be an Arab and a Christian all at the same time. It doesn't mean that you're sitting there and promoting the violence that was committed against Christians, right?
Yeah.
I just think that unfortunately, when that conversation becomes very polarized, it's because people are trying to project certain values on others because of, again, past pains or whatever.
So you don't think it's like an accuracy thing? You think it's like if you identify as it, that's kind of fine?
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally a kind of person who, when they ask me, like, here in Canada, what do you identify as? I always tell them, I'm an Egyptian who's a Christian. I don't identify as Arab because here in the West, Arabs immediately means Muslim,
right?
And that's a fair statement because at the general level, the vast majority of Arabs are indeed Muslim. Yeah. So I emphasize that we're the Christian Church of Egypt. That's all.
I think for young people too, maybe we're in a season right now where being Arab is a little bit kind of cool. I don't know. It's like,
is that right?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's like on social media and stuff, it's like Habibi everywhere. And it's like, it's just cool being Arab right now. It's 20 years ago, after 9/11, not very cool.
That wasn't the
case. Now it seems like it's kind of cool. And,
interesting.
I think identity and like who we think we are is very kind of a complicated issue. Like obviously an Egyptian can't identify as like like a Chinese person. That wouldn't make any sense, right?
Well, give it a few years.
Yeah, give it a few years.
I mean, I gotta tell you, here in Canada, you'd be surprised, but
well, yeah, I'd never say never, I guess, but
yeah,
with Arab, I think like there's some leeway there where like, okay, it kind of makes sense, there's probably some Arab in every Coptic's blood, it's like we're intermingling with these people, there has to have been intermarriages and things like that, and we're taking a lot of their cultural, kind of things and music and stuff, so it makes sense. All right, another guy asked, what is and this gentleman, just to give you some background, I think he's like inquiring into the Orthodox faith, and he's been to several different kind of expressions of Orthodoxy, Eastern, yada yada, and he's also been to the Coptic Church many times, and he's asking, what is the Coptic defense of iconography? He didn't elaborate, but I have an idea of what he may be thinking, but
yeah. So iconography in the Coptic Church has always been a huge tradition to be able to express what we believe, specifically in light of the incarnation, that because God became man, then God can be depicted in visible form. And obviously, if you go to some of the more ancient monastic communities in Egypt, especially if you go to like Wadi Natrun or the desert of Skitis, as it was known among the early desert fathers, a lot of those very ancient monasteries have incredible iconographic depictions. But we didn't have the same fight that a lot of people in the Eastern Orthodox did with iconoclasm. We didn't have that because we were already just trying to survive under, the invasion of Islam. So while they were going through their iconoclastic fights and battles and trying to defend iconography, we didn't necessarily have that kind of same problem as they did. So they formulated an entire theology surrounding iconography, and it turned into the victory of orthodoxy, and specifically like all that conversation. We never necessarily had that same need as them. So our tradition was never as solidly founded as theirs because they had reason to make it that solid because it was attacked. In
Mm.
our case, the faith itself was under attack, right?
Right.
It wasn't just iconography.
Yeah.
We were just trying to make sure that Christianity continued to exist in Egypt. So it was a
Mm.
very different kind of battle. And that's why you walk into churches in Egypt, and some of the traditions look like they're a little bit more influenced by Asian influence. Others are very Greek. Some of them are very Coptic under Dr. Isaac Fanous, who, reformed Coptic iconography in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. And so, like, you'll notice that there's change. You'll even see some Coptic churches who they've embraced Western art, and it's still an icon.
Yeah.
To an Eastern Orthodox person, they might walk into my local church, St. George and St. Anthony's, and we have Western art. Okay, so it's the very European kind of artistic, like Michelangelo kind of art. And they're still consecrated icons. And the person might walk in there and say, "This is not traditional." Well, it's not traditional for you. And you're speaking about a very specific expression of artistic form,
Mhm.
but it's still very much an icon, because when people stand in the front of it, that icon is a window into heaven. And that icon's intention is to be able to allow you to connect with the saint or the Holy Theotokos or the Lord Christ himself, who is depicted in that icon. And so it serves its purpose as an icon. Now, what I really love about Coptic iconography is that there's a revival that's happening right now, and it's really beautiful. We have so many young people now who are invested in studying theology properly in order to be able to do iconography properly. You see a variety of different expressions of Coptic iconography resurfacing. It's really, really encouraging, and it's really beautiful. So I think 20 years from now, you're going to see really traditional Coptic iconography really fill a lot of homes and spaces and churches. And so it's really beautiful to see that. But we didn't have to go through an iconoclastic battle the same way that the Eastern Church did. So I don't know if that answers the question of the person who asked it, but
You actually did without me reading the full question, because in his question he contrasts it with the robust defense that the Byzantine Orthodox Church has. So yeah, you actually hit it right on the head.
yeah.
Okay, this is a lighter one. Who's your favorite saint and why?
St. Anthony. I mean, St. Anthony is he's a really big deal to me. As Abuna Anthony Paul, for those of you who might know him, always says St. Anthony is the best saint. And obviously, me and him are biased, but there's a reason for that. Like, to be honest with you, when being considered for the priesthood, I wanted to be called Moses, after my patron saint growing up, which was Saint Moses the Strong.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know how it happened, but Anthony followed me everywhere I went, and people just kept telling me, "You're going to be Anthony, you're going to be Anthony, you're going to be Anthony." And then, the name stuck, and like, I feel like the name chose me. I didn't choose the name. And that's when I really got to discover St. Anthony, and I absolutely fell in love. So St. Anthony to me is definitely, he's a big deal to me. Yeah. He's a very big deal to
me. What was your name before you were ordained?
Megid.
Megid. Oh, yeah. You can't be Abuna Megid.
Nope.
Okay, that's nice. Is it wrong to question God?
Are you questioning for the sake of the truth, or are you questioning because your ego is hurt and you're just challenging God for the sake of challenging him? Mm-hmm. A child can walk up to his father and lovingly say, "Help me understand." A child can walk up to his father and say, "I'm hurt. Why did you allow this?" But a child should never walk up to his father and say, "I think you're full of it, Dad. Like, defend yourself. Defend your position." Right? If I'm coming from a place of ego, yes, pride is leading the conversation, and it is sinful. If it's coming from a place of a desire to understand, I think it's one of the healthiest things you can do, for you to stand before your Lord and tell him, "Help me understand." If we don't do that, then we're not children. And it's perfectly okay for us to ask in faith with the intention of pursuing truth. But if we're just pursuing comfort, or we just want him to give us what we want, then you're not worshiping God, you're worshiping yourself. And you're just upset that he won't let you.
We are always encouraged to set goals and strive for success and achieve our dreams. Does God care for our earthly success?
I'm about to burst the bubble for a lot of people. What God desires for us is our sanctification and our salvation. And God is willing to bless our endeavors here as long as they will lead us to that. But does God care whether or not you buy that big house at the corner of the street in that neighborhood that you really wanted? Does God care that somebody's going to put those 3 little letters in front of your name on your business card so they can say CEO or CFO or VP or whatever? Does God care whether or not you get 1 million views on your channel or 1 million subscribers?
I hope he does.
He doesn't. I hate to break it to you. I hate to break it to you. And the intention here is not to say God doesn't care. The intention is to say that what God really cares about is everything that will lead to your salvation and your sanctification. And when we're pursuing things that, like, even the way that you began that question, we're always encouraged to pursue our goals and our dreams and this and that. Who is encouraging you to do this? These are the same people who are telling you, watch my videos and I'll show you how to become it. Buy my book and you'll be a millionaire before the age of 30. These are the same people who are trying to turn you into the very product that they want to be able to sell to you. So when we say we're encouraged, we just gotta, what we should be encouraged to do is to work out our salvation in fear and trembling. That's what Scripture tells us to be encouraged to do. So God is going to bless any endeavor that's going to lead us to Him. And some of us are going to be blessed at the level of some form of worldly success, but not all of us in the way that you dream big, I want to be like Tony Robbins kind of thing. That's not going to happen. And I hope it doesn't happen, because I'm not really sure how that fits into the passages of Scripture where Christ says, how difficult is it for a rich man to enter into the kingdom?
Yeah. God says He loves us. I know it. I believe it. But how do we know and truly feel God's love?
You can't unless you enter into a relationship with Him. The same way that, if I sit here and I tell you your uncle in Egypt really loves you, your uncle in Egypt talks about you all the time, your uncle in Egypt is constantly always raising you at this pedestal and talking to everyone about you, and he's so proud of you and this and that, and you're sitting there saying, I don't even know what uncle you're talking about. I'm really happy that somebody supposedly loves me and thinks so highly of me, but I don't know this uncle. If there's no relationship, love becomes strictly theoretical. Unless there is encounter and intimacy and real relationship, and love is really meaningless, because you can write love letters to your wife all you want. Unless she is actually in a relationship where she gets to feel and be on the receiving end of that love, your letters are useless. If anything, they might even be insulting.
Yeah. That's it, Abuna. No more questions tonight. Thanks so much. Had so much fun. Can you commit to coming on one more time?
I'd love to.
Can we run this back?
Maybe after the rush of Lent.
Okay, all right. We'll run this back after Lent on the Holy 50s. God willing.
Wonderful.
Okay.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Abuna.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.